Alright folks, I left off on the slides here, so let's pick up from there. So there are also partially filled arrays. And again, sometimes you don't know how big the array needs to be. So the size gets filled through other parts such as functions. So again, there's an example on page 211 in the 6th edition. And the last example I gave you in the last video kind of showed you the same thing. Like, I declared an array of size, actually I didn't put anything in the size brackets, and then that was filled later on. And I filled it twice to create two separate arrays, one with a size of 5 and one with a size of 10. So you get the idea. Alright, and again, this is kind of an example of the same thing. Hey, fill, I got nothing in there, but then later on, when we go through the function, that size gets filled. And when the size gets popped in there, that's when the array is created. Now this is the same example that's in your book on page 211 if you have the 6th edition. I think it's like 209 if you have the 5th edition. I just took out a bunch of stuff so that I could put the function declaration and then the function definition here together so you can kind of see them side by side. But you get the idea. Sometimes you will see the functions listed without a size. Alright, next I'm going to show you an example of searching an array for a value, then I'm going to do sorting an array for a value, and then we're going to talk about multi-dimensional arrays. Now in our class, the biggest one you'll do is a two-dimensional array, meaning you've got two different indexes. And they give you a couple pictures in the book to kind of help you visualize it. But basically you've got two indexes, index 1 which is 0, 1, 0 and 1, and then you have a second index which is 0, 0. So in this case you could have four possible combinations. You could have 0, 0, 0, 1, and then 1, 0, and then 1, 1. So you can see how that gets confusing very fast. Imagine if you had a 5-dimensional array or a 12-dimensional array, and then you've got 12 different indexes to go through. So the easiest way that I've felt to get a grasp on the multi-dimensional array is this example here from your book. There are 4 students, and those 4 students have taken 3 quizzes. So the students are the very first array. So I have student 0, student 1, student 2, student 3. Student 0, 1, 2, 3, student 0, 1, 2, 3. So I have 4 students. And then the quizzes are numbered 0, 1, and 2. So 0, 0 is filled with a 10, 0, 1 is filled with a 10, and then 0, 2. So that guy obviously scores really well. But the second student, student 1, scored a 2, a 0, and a 1. So that's how multi-dimensional arrays work. This is an array to track students and quiz scores together in one array. So you can have huge multi-dimensional arrays, of 100 different indexes, but we're getting way too complicated. So the biggest we'll do in class is a two-dimensional array. So just kind of keep that in mind. Alright, let's move on to searching and sorting in the coding examples. Alright, this coding example might get a little long, so I may just cut and paste stuff to make the time go faster. So I'm going to do a couple things in this coding example. First, I'm going to use a constant variable for my array size. And that way, if somewhere later on I have to change my array, I can just change that one constant variable, and then my array size would be changed. And that way, I don't have to modify the entire program. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create two different functions. One to fill the array, and then one to search the array. And what we're going to do is we're going to search it for a value. So that way, once the array is created, let's say we make an array size of 10, can I find this value in my array? So that's what we're going to do. So first, I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to create that array size as a constant. So remember, const, and then it's going to be an integer, and we're going to call it, remember, whenever we do constants, we typically make them all capitals. So we're going to call this one declared size. Oh my gosh, don't tell me why I did that. And it's going to be 20. Alright, now I'm going to create two different functions. Oh, you know what? And I need to declare those first. So those functions are going to be, the first one's going to be void, and it's going to fill the array. and it's going to have integer and then function or array A. Don't do that. It's going to have an integer of size and the integer constant number used. So we're getting really tricky. Now I want to make another one, and this one's going to return an integer. Search. Search the array. Number user. Alright, so now I've got the two functions I'm going to use. I'm going to have this function that's going to fill the array, and then I have this function that's going to search the array. And when I search the array, I have to have the array in there, obviously, and then we're using the constant to fill the array. And then what number we're looking up, and then what number we're comparing it to. So anytime you search something, you have to have, what am I searching? What number am I using to search, and then what am I searching for? So there'll typically be three values. All right, let's go over the functions first real quick. Let me get outside of main, and I'll make those. All right, so I'm done typing that in, and I actually got it in correctly. Christmas miracle. So here's your first function. So this one's going to fill the array. So it's going to ask the user, hey, enter up to whatever the size of non-negative numbers. So remember, somewhere in the main program, we're going to create the size and say, hey, this array is going to hold 20 or something like that. And then we're going to ask the user to fill the array and pop that stuff in there. So what this does is has the user keep popping in numbers, and then as long as the numbers are greater than 0 and the numbers are smaller than the size of the array, keep inputting numbers. So that's all this does. This just fills the array. All right, let's move on to the second function. And all right, let me type this in real quick. All right, so here's our search function. So remember, our search function has to have three variables. What array are we searching? What number are we currently searching? And then what are we comparing it to? What are we looking for? So here we set the index to 0, meaning we're going to start at element 0. And then the Boolean found is going to be false. And then while not found, or in other words, while not false, and the index is less than the number used or the size of the array, keep doing this. And then if the target is the index, then it's true. Else, just add one to the index and do it all over again. And then if found, return the number, or return -1. So simple search function, and I guess I don't know what else to say. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you see stuff like this and you have no idea what it does, what I recommend is putting comments in there to yourself. Like, hey, sets index to element 0. So that means I'm going to start searching at 0. So and then sets the variable found to false. Record what this stuff does. Use comments on each line of code, especially, oh, hey, that's what that means. Pop that comment in there. And then what I typically do, and you might not want to do this, when I went through this class and I was learning this stuff, is I took screenshots of my program. Like I would take a screenshot of this with all my comments in there, and I put that in my binder. And that way I'd have it to refer to later. Because a lot of the stuff, like, we talk about functions, but then luckily we use functions in here, but we're not talking about call by value and call by reference anymore. So it's very easy for you by week 7 to forget that stuff that we used back in those weeks. So I like to keep that stuff on hand. So you get the idea. So there's our two functions. We're going to fill the array and we're going to search the array. All right, now let's create the main. So what's the first thing I got to do? Remember, your program runs main, and then main calls for things outside of main if they're needed. So what's the first thing I need to do? Well, if I'm going to have an array, I need to declare the array. So in this case, integer, the array. Oh, I would do that every time. And then the declared size of the array. And then I'm going to have some other variables. I'm going to have list size and target. Now, after I create the array, I need to fill the array. Well, how do I fill the array? Well, I need to make a function call for the fill array function. So in that case, I just do a function call, and then I fill in the 3 parameters. It needs an array. We're going to use array. So remember here, down here, the first variable it needs is, it's like, hey, what function do you want me to use? Well, I'm going to use the array function that I just declared. Then it's going to ask you, what's the size going to be? And the size is going to be the declared size. And then it's going to ask you the target, in this case the number used. What are we looking for? And we're looking for the target. Alright, then we wrap it up and we're set. So now it's going to fill the array for us. So now we need a couple other variables. I'm going to create char, which is going to have the answer. And then I'm going to create the result. And now I'm going to make a loop, and this is going to be a do while loop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the search and then ask them if they want another search. And if they don't want another search, then I'll stop. So it's going to say do this, and then while the answer is no. So it'll run once because we assume if they're running this search program, they want to run at least one search. So a do while loop would be perfect for this. Alright, I'm going to pause the video and type this in, and then we'll go through this line by line. Alright, so I popped that in. So all we've done for our main is we've declared the array, we've filled the array, and then we created 2 other variables that I'm going to use in this loop. So the loop is going to say, remember, a do while loop always runs at least once. So we know if they're running a search program, they want to search at least once. So it's going to say, hey, enter the number to search for, and then that's going to be the target. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. And then the result is going to equal search, and now that's a function call for the search function that we created here. Alright, and then if you remember back in our search function, the way it was set up was if it found the target, it would return the index number, and if it did not find the target, it would return -1. And remember, because it's returning an integer, either the index or a -1, that's why it was not a void function. It actually returns a value. So then if I go back up here, after I called the function, if result is -1, then the target is not on the list. You know, whatever you're looking for was not in the array. Or if it wasn't -1, then it means it gave you the index number. In that case, we're showing, hey, here's the target is stored in array position, and then what that index number was. And then another note out there, hey, don't forget the first position is 0, which would tell you that, like, if this result was position 4, or, you know what I mean, that's you get the idea. And then it asks, hey, do you want to search again? And then, you know, remember the user, you want to put something in there, yes or no, followed by return, y, y or n. Don't type in the whole word. And then whatever their answer is, as long as the answer is not an and not capital N, it goes back and does it again. But as soon as they enter n, then this now becomes false or whatever, and then it ends the program. So there was a lot of code there, but hopefully you guys you understand how that all worked. So if I try to run it, oh, alright, where did I screw up? Line 28. Oh, I see what I did. Alright, who let me screw this all up? That should have been list size. Ah, and I misspell it. Great. You know what? I'm just going to pause this while I fix this. Alright, let's see if that fixes it. There it goes. Alright, so enter up to 20 non-negative whole numbers. Mark the end of the list with a negative number. So I'm going to make 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then I'm going to make the end of the list as a -1. then enter a number to search for. I want to search for 6. And then 6 is stored in array position 2. So remember, the array was filled position 0, 1, 2. Then do you want to search again? Well, if I don't want to search again, I hit N and end the program. So remember, as you're going through this stuff and you're making examples, it helps if you put comments in there. This is what this does. This is what this does. Especially when you learn something new. And that way you can go back, because like you'll do something this week, then next week you'll have another program that wants you to do that same thing. You're like, oh, hey, I did that last week. Crap, how did I do that? What did I do there? What did that do? So hopefully that kind of covers the search function in here. Now let's talk about sort. Alright, now we're going to do a sort of an array. And I'm going to create, I think, 4 functions. You know, 1 to fill, 1 to sort, 1 to swap values, and then 1 is like an index of smallest to highest. So I'm going to type this. I'm going to pause the video and type some stuff in. Then we'll talk about like what I typed in. Because if I run this the whole time that I'm typing, it'll take us forever. So first thing I need to do is I need to declare my functions. So my first function is pretty easy. It's going to fill the array. It's going to have an array, it's going to have the size of the array, and then the number that you're looking for. Alright, my next function is going to sort the array, and it's going to need an array to sort and then a number to use. My third function is going to just swap the values, and we've talked about swapping values before. Remember, we can't just take 1 and pop it into 2 and then 2 into 1, because when we take the value of 1 and change it to 2, then we've lost the value of 1. So we have to create a small function to create a temporary value to hold the value for 1, and then take value 1 and move the space over from 2, and then take 2 and move the space over from temp, and then we're all set. Alright, and then the fourth function is going to return a value, so we have an integer that it's going to return. And it's going to have a function, or I'm sorry, an array, and then it's going to have a start, and then how many numbers were in there. So this one I'm going to do an opposite. And the other one, I did the functions first, and then we filled in main. This one I'm going to fill in main first, and then do the functions. So main is pretty simple here. Alright, so I entered the first line of code, so it's going to say, hey, this program sorts numbers from the highest to lowest. Alright, so what's the first thing we need to do? Well, we need an array created. So we're going to create an array of type integer, and it's going to be sample array, and it's going to have a size of 10. And then I'm also going to create the variable number used, and I'm all set. So now I've got my array created. So what do I need to do with my array? So remember, with coding, we try to break things into steps. I need to create the array, I need to fill the array, I need to manipulate the array, so baby steps. So now I need to fill the array. Well, then I'm going to use my function for filling the array, and he's going to have some variables, sample array, because remember, the fill array needs an array, a size, and then a number to use. So I'm going to use sample array, and then the size is going to be 10, and then I'm just going to leave it as number used. Once I fill the array, then I want to sort the array. So sort, and then again the same thing. Now the sort only wanted 2 variables. What array am I sorting and what number am I using? So in this case I'm going to sort sample array, and then I'm using number used. So then I'm all done. Well, I'm kind of done with main, almost. So then I want to give the user his stuff, because what I've done is, I've created an array, I filled the array, and I've sorted the array. Now I want to give the user his output, his answer that he was looking for. So I'm going to send a C out to the screen. And it's going to say, in sorted order the numbers are. So now I'm going to give him his array elements in the sorted order. And I'm going to, remember, anytime I'm doing a loop or I'm walking through an array, I need to probably use a for loop. And then I need to create this real quick. So here's my for loop. So for index, I'm going to start at 0, and then as long as index is less than the number used, and then I'm going to keep incrementing it by 1, and then I'm going to say, hey, here is your order. Because remember, I've used sort to sort the array, so now it's in order. So then I'm going to start giving the array values starting at 0. So if here's element 0, here's element 1, here's element 2, and then because I already sorted them previously, they should spit out for the person. So that's all there is to main. So depending on how you do that, like in the last example, I typically do my functions first to figure out what I'm going to do. But if you can do the main first and just figure out, oh, hey, here's the steps I need to do. Now I need to create the functions. So that's what we'll do next here. We'll create the functions. All right, the fill array function is we've already kind of covered. Let me pop that in here real quick. So same thing, you know, we have what array are we doing, how big is it, and then what number are we doing, and then enter up to whatever size, whole negative numbers, and then that's going to start out at 0, and then we're going to call it next, and we're going to go through next, and as long as next is bigger than 0 and smaller than the size, we're going to keep going through there. So now we've filled the array. So we've asked the user to enter so many numbers and to stop it with a negative number, and then we put those numbers in order, so they fill the array. So the next function we need to do, we need to create our sort function. So we've created that function, so all the sort value is going to do is it's going to go through each of the values and say, hey, is this value smaller than this value? And if not, it'll move those to the right, and if so, then if it is, then it'll move it to the left so that the indexed values, or the elements, are in order for smallest to biggest. Now, I've placed some comments in here too so you can kind of see what these do, if any of that doesn't make sense to you. But it should be pretty easy, and if not, make sure you bring this up in the discussion forums. Alright, then we need a simple swap value. So here's the swap value, and again, the same thing that we've already talked about. You've seen that before. And then we need to do our index of smallest. So this function, index of smallest, works with the sort function, because you'll see index of smallest here is being called in the function. So in the sort function, we're calling another function. And then it gives you values. Hey, we're going to do an A, index and number used. And then this helps it to move things over. So if I got to the part where we talked about this, or I showed you this, and you were like, oh crap, what's he doing there? Maybe adding this will help you. So those two work together. I'm trying to fit them both on the screen, but I can't. They work together to move the elements in order. And remember, this last function is an integer function, so it returns a value, and it returns the index of the minimum. So where is the minimum value placed? And it should be at index 0. Because remember, all arrays are numbered 0 through whatever, and then so this one does smallest to highest, so smallest should be in the place of 0. Alright, and this example is from the book. This is what I have to kind of cover. There are simpler or easier or more efficient ways of doing this, but they were trying to show you a couple different things in this all at once. A function calling another function, some other things. And then if I try to run this, this program sorts numbers highest lowest, enter up to 10 non-negative whole numbers, and mark the end of the list with a negative number. Now, where does that 10 come from? That 10 comes from the array size that we declared in the very beginning of our main program. So, you know, 5, 6, blah, 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 and then I'm going to do -1. So I'm going to have 5. And then let's go, so it sorts them 3, 5, 7, 7, 8, and then press a key to continue, and boom, gone. So all that just to sort the arrays. Woohoo! Alright, hopefully that made sense. Again, this example is in your book. They describe the different parts of it and what everything does. But again, if you have questions, make sure you're using that discussion forum. Alright, this last example, I'm going to just just copy it over and move it over here, and then we'll talk about it real quick. But we'll talk about a multifunctional array. Alright, this one I cut and pasted exactly from the book, so that way you can see all the comments that are in here. So he creates 3 different functions. One to compute the average, the student average, one to compute the quiz average, and then one to display stuff out to the screen. So he's got his 3 functions. And again, if you need to read this and I'm going too fast, just pause the video. Alright, so then he goes in here and he creates his multi-dimensional. So the multi-dimensional array is going to be called grade, and it has 2 dimensions, number of students and then number of quizzes. And then he creates his two variables, the average, the student average, and then the quiz average. Your students may average 12 over all quizzes, but quiz 1's average may be different. Does that make sense? And then boom, the array gets filled. So in this example, he's filling the array manually, and you can do that. Although, why you'd ever want to, I have no idea. And then he's calling his functions, hey, compute the student average, hey, compute the average grade, and then hey, display that stuff. And then we're done. So that's all the main is. And then you've got your functions. So this one computes the average, pretty self-explanatory. This one computes the quiz average, again, self-explanatory. And then this one displays the information you're looking for. Hey, this student had this average or stuff like that. So multifunctional arrays, they're relatively easy. As long as, if you're doing a two-dimensional array, you can kind of live with that because you're like, hey, each item has two quantities: the student number, the student index, and then the quiz index. So it kind of makes sense. It's when you get into 3, 4, 5 that where these things get crazy huge and astronomical. So this will be the biggest one that we ever ask for. But again, it's just an array with two different indexes or two sets of elements. As long as you can keep those elements or keep track of those elements, you're good. Hey, so grade 0, any grade 0 is always the student. So there's student 0, and then student 0 took quiz 0, and then here student 0 took quiz 1, and then here student 0 took quiz 2. It's a lot easier to think about it that way. Personally, I think it would be a lot easier if we could just substitute names in there. So if we could grade, Bill on quiz 1 got a 10. It would make it a lot easier to read, but we get what we get. All right, I'm going to cycle through this one more time slowly. And if you have a part that you need to focus on, you're like, well, what did they do there? Just pause the video and kind of look at it. Again, if you have any questions, make sure you bring them up on the discussion forum. I think we do ask you to do one multifunction array in the lab. And I think it's this week. Dun dun dun. But I think what they ask you to do is relatively easy, like compute the average of this or something like that. All right, that about wraps up for arrays. Again, questions, email me, post on the discussion forums. I'm checking Angel every day. Even Sundays, I've actually been checking it. So if you've got questions, now's the time to ask. Remember, you're paying $400 for this class. If you've got a question, you need to ask it. And those of you, the guys that know all this stuff already, feel free to answer any questions that other people post. Again, if you're on the borderline between a grade, I'm more than happy to bump you up, depending on your activity on the discussion forums and how much you helped others.